I've been spending 35 years studying the Ice Age, and about 20 years ago I took a detour and did a lot of study of the flood, what I mostly been studying is the surface of the earth, and because that's a lot easier for a non-geologist because it's just the shapes, geometry, and so it's in the field of geomorphology. Geo meaning earth, morphology meaning shape. So I've been studying the shapes of the earth and all the unique features we see on the surface that can't be explained by uniformitarian scientists, but yet can be explained by the runoff of the floodwaters. So I've been spending years doing that, and finally got it published in this book here, Flood by Design: Receding Water Shapes the Earth's Surface. I was hoping they'd order copies here so I can show you one, because I don't even have a picture in here. So anyway, you can order that on at least the creationresearch.org, that site. Anyway, I'm just going to go over a few highlights. I think I talked about this 3 years ago when I was here last, if I'm not mistaken. So many of you have probably heard it, or anyone remember it? Just a few of you. But you know, in 3 years, who can remember any of the details? So anyway, so I'm making this kind of a short talk. I'm not really introducing it too well, but anyway, when you graph the flood, you can think of it as the water goes up and the water goes down. The left is what's called relative sea level. That really has no meaning, but this is the time scale in the flood here. But anyway, it goes up and it peaks in 150 days, and then it goes down in 371 days. That's from the biblical chronology. And this is just like a flash flood, any flood, especially a flash flood. If it's coming at you, like the Big Thompson flood that I studied in weather class, on your Front Range here, the water will come up fast at the start, and then it'll just go up slow, and then finally it goes down. It retreats. This is exactly like with the Genesis flood. You'd have what I would call the flooding stage, where it's actually coming up, and the first part goes up the fastest. The first 40 days is probably the most violent part of the flood. That's the mechanism of the flood. Now, there's two versions of it. Some people think that it peaked in 40 days and stayed steady state till day 150 when Ark grounded on the mountains of Ararat. And then from then on it went down. Some people think it peaked in the middle, but you know those are alternatives. We really don't know. I go along with the blue curve. It rose fast and then it just rose slow. But regardless, I'm not going to even in this talk, I'm not even going to consider what happened during the flooding stage. I'm only going to be referring to this, where the water is actually going down. It's actually running off the continents. And when you do that, just like with a flash flood, you can divide it up into phases. You can divide it up into two stages, a flooding stage and the retreating stage, but you can divide that up into phases. And this is just like with the flash flood. It's the same thing. But I want to focus in on what's called the retreating stage, from day 150 to day 371. And at first, when everything's still covered, the water is going to be moving across the earth in wide currents. Maybe they're 1,000 miles wide, maybe 2,000, and they're going across the earth. And when you look at them going down current, since it's so wide, and maybe it's only a mile or two deep, it looked thin like a sheet. It looked like you're looking at a sheet. So it's called water moving as sheets. And then as more mountains and plateaus come up out of the water is forced to diverge around these, and it becomes more channelized with time. And this works with any flood. As the water's going down, you see a few rocks sticking out, and the water then goes around it. And then more and more rocks stick up, or a bank sticks up, and the water's flowing around these things. So that's the way floods work. So water, when it's almost totally flooded, moves as a whole, as a sheet, and then when it's more objects are sticking out, mountains or plateaus, it moves in channels. And each of these phases produces a certain mark on the surface of the earth as it moves off the earth. And this is what I'm going to talk about, the evidences for this last part right here. So the first thing you got to think about is, well, how did the water drain off the future continents? How does this happen? In order for you to produce this water moving in sheets and water moving in channels. Well, I believe Psalm 104, verses 6 to 9, talk about this. You covered it with the deep as with a garment. The water was standing above the mountains. At thy rebuke they fled. The mountains rose, the valley sank down to the place which thou didst establish for them. Thou didst set a boundary that they may not pass over, that they may not return to cover the earth. I believe this is mainly, in fact, I believe pretty strongly that this is referring to the flood and not the third day of creation when the earth appeared out of the waters that were below the firmament. Because it says God covered it. In other words, God caused the waters to go up. In the third day, He caused the waters to recede, you see. And then in verse 9, He set a boundary that the water may not cover the earth. But in this, after the mountains are covered, the way the waters drain is the mountains rise and the valleys sink down. Well, if that's happening, the water is going to drain. That's how the water would drain. So this is kind of the big picture of the Western United States. You have massive uplift of the continent and the mountains at the same time. And the water, which would generally flow from west to east because of the spin of the earth, gets diverted and starts to flow split, and one part goes towards the Pacific Ocean, and the other part goes towards the Mississippi River Valley. That's the big picture. And when it does that, it affects the surface of the land. It's eroding. Actually, it's eroding. The Western United States and the high plains shows huge amount of erosion. And when it does that, it leaves special features that are very difficult for uniformitarian scientists to explain. Uniformitarian scientists are those that believe that we use present processes to explain all the rocks and fossils. So, is there evidence